All righty. So we are going to cover possibly two sets of laws today. I wasn't so sure about if we're going to do the next one. We're getting closer to the end of laws of Shabbos. We have about four more chapters until we complete the laws of Shabbos. But let's bring up the page that we're learning now, chapter number 93, the laws of Shabbos vis-a-vis childbirth. So obviously, childbirth is there's no question that we do everything we can for mother and baby to make sure the birth goes well. But just the details of the law, obviously, we have to discuss here now in chapter 93. So the Kitzur says as follows, that miyad kisheschila isha lahargish simani leda. The question is when do we start going into labor mode? So as soon as the woman starts to feel signs of labor, afilu hi misupekes. She's not 100% sure. Especially young mothers. When we had our first child, we went in a few false alarms into the hospital. Even if she's in doubt, we call the midwife, or in the case where you go to a hospital, even if it's from a far distance. Okay, yeah, Rebecca said she's on her way. So obviously, this is again we calling the midwife itself. It could be a situation of violating the Shabbos. It's not considered a violation if it's talking about childbirth, even if you have all the different conditions that we may possibly have to make this happen in a healthy way. If you're doing a home delivery, hey Aaron, or if you're doing a in hospital delivery, even if you're in doubt, as soon as the labor pains start coming in and we start thinking that maybe we're going ready for birth, obviously we do everything we can to make this a seamless delivery. Now, it doesn't mean, and that's what we're going to learn, that just because we're giving birth, that we just are not caring about Shabbos at all. So, for instance, if you live in Eretz Yisrael or in a place like New York, maybe Aaron will give us insight of that, how things are in New York. But in Israel, for sure, in Yerushalayim, there's numbers that women get before they're ready to go into birth. Let's say in the 9th month or in the third trimester, where they'll get ready. The numbers you call for someone to take you to the hospital if you're doing a hospital delivery. So there are special non-Jewish taxi drivers that are designated. They know that they're going to be called in the case of an emergency to take, and they know the drill, whether it is, if you have to pay, or hold on, Aaron, let me just finish my thought. If you have to pay, or today an Uber, obviously calling an Uber is no problem to setting up a pickup. But in the case that you have over here in Eretz Yisrael, where you have ability to prearrange it or have numbers of special people that are non-Jewish to be able to pick you up and take you to the hospital. Maybe either you work out the payment before or whatever, you give a credit card. There's ways to do it. If you can do it, obviously there's no mitzvah, there's no obligation to violate the Shabbos if you could prepare for it. Like in the bris, circumcision, there's certain things that we do on the day of the circumcision. There's certain things we have to take care of beforehand. But if you didn't, then there's no questions. Again, then there's the question: if let's say if you're driving your wife to the hospital, so as opposed to taking a taxi or what have you, that's not opportunity. So then also there's different laws. There's some people that we'll talk about. You can't really turn off the engine because once you get there's no need to turn off the engine. If the battery just dies out, you'll figure it out after Shabbos. There's other things that are connected to the Shabbos. For instance, if the husband goes into birth, he can't just take a taxi back. But when we talk about for the doctor, we spoke last week, that's different. The doctor has to be able to get home. So there's different laws regarding how to do it. But in general, the thinking that the law is we don't take any questions, start getting nervous. If you have to get to the hospital, you get to the hospital. You have to do delivery. You have to get the midwife, you get the midwife. These are things. But if you can keep the Shabbos as much as possible, we obviously try. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, just before Shabbos, we went into the hospital, so it wasn't a problem getting there. But once I was in the hospital, it was Shabbos by the time we were giving birth. So I could have walked home. It would have been a long walk, but I didn't. So I had to stay in the hospital. They had nothing for us. And I couldn't stay with my wife because they said there was another woman in the room. So at the time that we had to leave, because they wouldn't let us have any more guests, I just bummed around. Then there was a Hillel room where they give the kosher food. So I
Mhm.
stayed in there, but they had services in the hospital. I could have gone out. All the Hasidic shuls would have probably taken me in, but I just did the
Yeah,
Shabbos with the shul in the hospital in
absolutely.
Brooklyn.
So that's why Aaron says exactly right. So if you, even if you got there on Shabbos, which you would be allowed to go with your, like my father, being a yeshiva student and a rabbinical student and a rabbi in training at that time, when him and my mother were pregnant with my elder sister, Frumi. So I think Barbara, you met her. So my great grandfather, who was a Rav already in Europe, in Rakishik, and later in other places in Russia and in Georgia, and then in the Rav of the Beis Harav and of the Rebbe's household in 770, called in my father and says to my father, calling him by his first name, he said, "Listen here, if your wife goes into the hospital on Shabbos, I don't want you to start getting religious and that you go with your wife to the childbirth. Don't think you could just leave her alone." Even though he didn't, that was obvious, but he called him in to tell him that. And it so happened she was born on Shabbos, so he had his reasons to be concerned, and of course he jumped into the hospital to be taken with my mother, and so too I think if I'm not mistaken, when the Rebbe went when his mother was taken to the hospital on Shabbos, also he went in when his mother was taken in when she got sick and eventually passed away on Shabbos Shuva on the 6th of Tishrei, 1965. Okay, so here, of course, the footnote just points to obvious that it doesn't make it. We're not just talking about specifically a midwife, that's allowed, or to take the woman to the hospital, it's allowed. Again, how we do it specifically, if one can organize before Shabbos or before even getting closer to the ninth month or delivery date to to do a delivery in such a way that would make the getting to the hospital in ways that wouldn't make you violent. Obviously, that we try to do that. I just want to say another thing. Again, same thing would apply to a set date for a delivery. Like sometimes if a woman knows she's going to have a C-section or they're going to induce her, so obviously, unless there's a reason that it has to be done, and then again, if it has to, it has to. But to just say, if the doctor's looking at their schedule and they say, well, the only day we can induce you is on the Shabbos, so you're basically planning a Shabbos birth, which would include obviously things that would be violating the Shabbos. You'd have to speak to your local rabbi to find out in the circumstances if what should be done and what are how what would be your options in such a situation. But like to voluntarily set up a date that should be on Shabbos when you could figure out a way that it should not be on Shabbos, obviously it's a different situation. Okay. And even if you have to have delivery on Shabbos, obviously you could do things either coming to the hospital before Shabbos, or there's just different things that you could arrange just to violate the Shabbos. The point is we're not looking here Shabbos hutcha. It gets pushed off. It doesn't mean that there's no Shabbos. So it gets pushed off, and every single thing that you're doing that's would be considered a violation of Shabbos has to be considered if this is necessary. But obviously, if it's if you're under pressure, that's not a time to sit down and start opening up the Shulchan Aruch to see if this specific thing you're allowed to do. And always better, of course, when you get ready for childbirth, to get this information to be handy that you should know what you're ready to do when it comes to childbirth. So there's a certain level of negligence if a person doesn't take any kind of preparation of just like you would be negligent to go into birth without taking birthing lessons or without having conversation with your doctor, your midwife. So too, to not take into account your options for Shabbos would also be kind of a negligence. But at the end of the day, is when the moment comes, and just do whatever you have to do. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. Law number 2. Yeledes, a woman who's in childbirth, is harika chayla sheish b'sakana. Okay, so we learned in the past few chapters about the different levels of a person who's sick, a patient who is ill, critically ill, not critically ill, bedridden, not bedridden. So what is the classification of a woman in childbirth? Her classification is her classification. I know today the husband wants to be, it's our birth and all that, but you have to remember when it comes to Shabbos, there's a difference between the husband's classification and the wife's classification. So her classification is like a critically ill patient. And all the things we learned beforehand, that we're allowed to do for a critically ill patient, we're obviously allowed to do for a Yeledes, a woman in childbirth. And obviously, we can transgress the Shabbos for her. If you have someone else has to transgress the Shabbos for her, the chol mashi tzricha, whatever she needs in her moment of childbirth. Achim efshar la'asis aydei shinoi aydei nehudi oisid. It doesn't mean to just be brazen. If you can do it in a way of a shinoi, which means to do it in a non-unusual manner, which again is a way of showing that you're conscious of Shabbos, like we learned in other situations of muksa, or if there's a Gentile around, doesn't mean it's not so then we should do it. Okay, this is the question because we learned about that it's a mitzvah to do it. But there's difference between in a situation of childbirth, I guess, different a little bit than if you're regular chalishesh b'sakana, when there's an ability for an non-Jew to do it. We do have the famous story of the Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe told this story. The Rebbe said that in the early years they didn't tell the story, but the Rebbe tells the story many times of the Alter Rebbe on Yom Kippur, on Eilah, left the shul on to go to the corner of the village or Lubavitch, wherever the Adi or Liajna, where he was, to chop wood, which obviously is violating the Shabbos, and to make a fire and to cook a soup for a young woman who just gave birth, that she had no one to care for her. And the Alter Rebbe himself did all these things, which were obviously a violation of the Yom Kippur, in order to prepare for her. And when they asked the Alter Rebbe, why did you do it? Send someone else. So obviously, we have to assume either that this idea that you try to look for a non-Jew is not a universal opinion. We'll see the footnotes. Or if there's a Jew, the Rebbe says the Alter Rebbe quoted the idea which we talk about mitzvah begadol, to show that that this is a mitzvah to help a person who's sick. So the most important person, and the Alter Rebbe was the most important person of that situation, or in any situation at that time. But here we talk about if you can't find the Gentile, you should. When do you start? When is she called a woman in childbirth? That we classify her as a sakana, that she's considered a critically ill woman, that with regard to the laws of Shabbos or the laws of Torah, for that matter, is mishateshav al mashber when she is seated on the birthing stool, i.e., when she's on the delivery bed, or when she starts to bleed, she can't walk on her own. We all know there's different stages, obviously, during the process of the childbirth. What about a woman who's going through, unfortunately, a situation of a miscarriage? If it's the Shulchan Aruch says here, if it's 40 days from when she went to the mikveh, meaning to say not from when she had her last period, but from when she went to the mikveh, because obviously she didn't have relationships until she goes to the mikveh, so we count 40 days from the mikveh. When she went to the mikveh, obviously we don't know the exact date of, even if we don't know the exact date of conception. Nevertheless, it is from that. If she's after 40 days, then her going through that level of a miscarriage, she has also a halachic classification of a yeledes, meaning of a critically ill patient. Okay, let's see. We have a bunch of footnotes over here. Let's go through them one by one. Okay, what are we talking about? If it should be done by a non-Jew. Okay, let's see because this is not so. It's not so. Let's see what the footnote would tell us. Though her situation is critical, so we said before that critical, it's even a mitzvah for a Jew to do it. A woman in confinement is part of the normal pattern of in life. Therefore, it's preferable, where possible, to do the malachas in an unusual manner or have a non-Jew do them. So again, so why are we saying, if we said it in chapter 92, I think it was, that in a critically ill person, it's a mitzvah, that's in a situation where, because critically ill, it's not the typical, but here we're talking about part of life is you get pregnant and you have childbirth. We know all these stages. So then it's not like a critically ill person, God forbid, with an illness, but this is just that she's going through a very difficult situation of childbirth, but obviously we're kind of more relaxed and we're a little more focused and we have methods. It's better to have a Gentile do it. But again, this is not the time to become religious and start waiting for a Gentile. Like I said, to have a Jewish person driver, not a problem. But if you could prearrange to have the non-Jewish taxi driver, of course, that's preferable. That's why here in Yerushalayim they have the Arab taxi drivers that know, initially that they're available. They give out their numbers to be available for services on Shabbos. Okay, number 3, and she's sitting on the birthing stool, of course, the delivery table. As soon as she starts to bleed, or water flow, which are when her water breaks, also that would be a classification that she goes into she's considered a Yoledes, a woman who's giving birth, which then would classify her as if a critically ill person. Okay, again, she's not that she's ill, but with regard to the laws of Torah and Shabbos. Okay, Shulchan Aruch 330 and the Bir Halacha talks about a woman who unfortunately would be having a miscarriage after 40 days of going to the mikvah, then she's also considered a Yoledes. Okay. Obviously, again, if a woman's in a bad situation and she's not exactly 40 days before going to she's in the 40 days of the mikvah, and you start looking at your calendar and she's bleeding and she needs help, then again, when you're in doubt of a person who's in a situation, then there's no questions. A person's in a health crisis, you don't ask any questions. But if we're talking about, again, where things are not in a panic or there's clarity, then obviously then the miscarriage has a difference of after the 30 days of going to. Okay. Law number 3. Any questions, please cut in. Law number 3. Call Shleisha Yom. Okay, this is getting towards childbirth. So again, just to stop over here, we've learned, like I said, there's the differences between the laws of the midwife or the doula that helps with the childbirth, about their laws of how they're pre and post childbirth with regard to Shabbos. We also have the laws of the husband pre and post childbirth, and again, even during the child getting to the hospital, different ways to do it. Again, today suggested that there's so many options with taxis and Ubers. It would be better to order an Uber than to start an engine and then to have the questions of how you turn off the engine and be carrying keys if there's no air, etc. So but for the husband to take a taxi back, unless there's a good reason for it and you have a specific heter from a Rav, then just off the cuff, that's not something that's allowed. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, just to say about Brooklyn, if you were to leave your car on, you have to leave your key in. Someone's taking your car. You're not gonna have it anymore. So if you have to drive them, there, if you're a sane person, you will not leave your car running. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
I know what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying, but you have to ask the rabbi, because it's not so simple to turn off the engine once you get there, and just because your car may get stolen, that's not pekuach nefesh.
Yeah, well, I got lucky. So I got there before Shabbos started
But
because she was in labor.
there's a taxi, and there's other ways of getting to the hospital besides
Right,
driving.
right. You can always get a taxi. This is New York. So there's 1,000 ways to get a taxi, and there's 1,000, and you can call Hatzalah on a special phone in the shul, which does not violate Shabbos.
Exactly. So there's all and there's the Hatzalah and there's the ambulance. There's different methods. Yeah, you may get charged for using an ambulance when you could take a car because they don't like to use it. But again, in places like New York or large Jewish communities, especially in Yerushalayim, there's usually a system of how we deal with Shabbos birth.
This is what I'll just give you this on the Hatzalah. If you're in the shul, and I have the code to my shul, so there's no reason I can't get in there. I could use the phone, call Hatzalah. Hatzalah does it the kosher way, and then when they don't charge you, they just now they started taking your insurance, but they don't give you a copayment. They just say whatever your insurance gets, and if you don't have insurance, which most people do, but if you didn't, they wouldn't charge you even. But they said as long as your insurance will give us money, might as well take it.
Okay, that's obviously each organization.
But they would take your info after Shabbos because you can't write anything, or they have Hatzalah does it the kosher way. So you could go and I could run in my shul, pick up the Hatzalah line that doesn't break Shabbos.
All right, that's again, when in an emergency and time is of essence, it's not a time to start getting to being too careful. I also want to say that we have, for instance, in Israel, we have walk-in the terem. For instance, in Yerushalayim, you have the walk-in. Also, you're just walking in. I don't think you have to even come in with your credit with your insurance card.
No, and if you come in and it's Saturday, so it's definitely Shabbos. They're not going to take all your information until after Shabbos. You just tell them they'll see you every Yom Khan. That's it.
Okay, so that basically gives us And then also you have to remember something else. There's questions. I remember in our case when we were, I think, because we've had, first of all, anyone who has a child, there's always a Shabbos around the childbirth because there's always the option for it to happen on Shabbos. But even during Yom Tov, I remember that that the Rav of Hatzalah, when we were there, I think if I remember correctly, it was a long time ago in London, said that if you have even a false alarm on Shabbos, obviously, so then you get to the hospital and there's no childbirth, so could you take the taxi back, or you could take? So there was the ruling was to take a taxi back home. Okay, I think so.
One thing, if it's on Shabbos, so the insurance only gives you this is something special, I think in New York, but I don't know. But the unless you have a C-section, so they only give you the most minimal time. But even if your birth was before Shabbos, but your time would extend to Shabbos, they will get you an extension for your insurance to pay for it because you can't leave on Shabbos.
That's a good question. What about if you have to be thrown out of the hospital on Shabbos? That's a good point.
So we get the extension. My wife got it.
That's a good point, and the question would be, what would be if they wouldn't give the extension, what would be the rules? Okay, okay. So what is her status after the birth? So the halacha says like this: the first 3 days after birth, even if the woman says no, you don't have, I'm good. You don't have to. I don't need a tea or hot compress, whatever it is that you have to do. We don't even take into account her protests because she's considered critically ill after. Again, she's not ill, but halachically considered in the classification of critically ill 3 days after childbirth. Just 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 a small note based on what Aaron was just saying about America today. I don't even believe they give you 24 hours after childbirth. Just about. Eretz Yisrael, they give you 2 days. And but I know my sister gave birth in Australia. They give you 7 days. Halacha says the woman in the first 3 days is a chaylish misakana. They shouldn't be throwing them out of the hospital after 24 hours. But that's another conversation. All right, kol shleishi in the first 3 days. I feel like Mersha and Tzricha mechal nas Shabbos. Even if the woman says I'm okay, I'm good, we don't take her protest for the law. Obviously, if you're trying to force her to have a hot tea and she doesn't need it, you don't have to make the hot tea. We're talking about where you think she needs something for her health and she's being careful because of Shabbos. We're not going to take her protesting. But what about after the first 3 days? If she doesn't have anything else wrong with her, obviously not connected to the birth or even connected to the birth, just post pain of a childbirth. So then, Ad Shiva Yamin, in the first 7 days, really, we're talking about 3, 4 from the 4th day on. Only if she says, "I need you to do X, Y, and Z," that would be something that would cause someone to desecrate the Shabbos. We would desecrate the Shabbos if she says she needs. So, but if she has another sickness, then again, if she's sick, then she's sick. Then there's obviously that's something separate, and there are complications that we all know that can possibly happen, God forbid, after childbirth. It's not just your typical post-childbirth recovery. But what happens if she says, "I don't need that? I don't need this." It's after the first 3 days, then we don't desecrate the Shabbos. Okay, so the question is, how do we count the days? Is it 24 hours? Or is it, even if she gives birth, let's say Sunday afternoon, by Sunday night, it's already the second day. So the Kitzur says, we're not talking about 24 hours, we're talking about from the day of birth. No matter what time it is, that's day 1. So we don't need 24 hours, which means we're not looking for 72 hours in total. We're looking for a total of 3 days. You're going, for instance, if she gave birth sometime on Wednesday, even towards the evening, but not after the evening. On Shabbos, she's ready after 3 days, because you say Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos is already the 4th day, even though she's not even 72 hours by Shabbos because she gave birth Wednesday late afternoon. If she gave birth on Shabbos in the evening, so then even though it's not a full 7 days, 24 hours times 7. But by the time the next Shabbos comes in, she's ready after 7 days. But if we're concerned that there may be a situation of risk, let's say the woman is just not doesn't recover well. She's weak, weak meaning that it takes her longer to recover from a childbirth. Not all women do childbirth equally, right? Is that make no one's gonna, if you go with 24 hours times 3 or times 7, it's also okay. Again, we're just trying to keep things within some sort of structure. But to be strict, this is not time and place. Okay. Let's see the footnotes over here. During the first 3 days after giving birth, that's obvious. Number 7, in order to attend her needs, for the needs that she has, whatever it is that you would have to do to attend her needs, that may include the desecrating the Shabbos, it's not a problem. Okay, number 8 is, regardless whether the doctors agree or disagree, what are we talking about? Up to 7 days, if she says, I require it, you may violate the Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah says it's not about the doctors. If the doctors say, no, she's okay, she's overreacting. That's not, again, we don't, this is when a chayla says, I need something, and the doctor say, I don't need something, we go with this sick person. Okay, again, we're not calling a woman after childbirth sick, but she's classified as a chayla because she has needs, and therefore we have to cater towards them. Number 9. But if she says it's not necessary, then it is not violated unless the doctors say that she requires something. So the Mishnah Berurah asks, what about on the flip side? In the 7-day period, she says I'm good. So the Kitzur says if she says she's good, then we don't desecrate the Shabbos. But if the doctors, the Mishnah Berurah Chafetz Chaim points out in the Mishnah Berurah that if the doctors say no, she needs these treatments or whatever it is that we're talking about, whatever that is, then we listen to the doctor. So if she says she needs and the doctor says no, we listen to her. If she says she doesn't need and the doctor says if she says she doesn't need, then it's okay. Then we don't desecrate Shabbos. If she says she doesn't need, but the doctor says she does need, then we go with the doctor. Okay. So we're always cautious, going to the side of caution. Okay, number 10 over here. What are we talking about? How we calculate the 3 days. Do we use it 24 hours or if it's of? Let's let Rebecca in over here. Okay, Rebecca, we're learning the laws of Shabbos delivery or post-delivery with regard to Shabbos. We're in the middle of law number 3. So here in footnote number 10, it's talking about that the 3 days and the 7 days are not 24 hours of a day, but the first day is that day. In other words, the same thing applies really with the bris, right? A circumcision. When we say the child is circumcised on the 8th day, so we don't say, we don't count 24 hours times 8. If you're born before Shkia, that's the 1 day. Even if you're 1 minute before the Shkia comes, then that's the day. So in other words, from the end of birth, we count from the end of birth, obviously, not from when she goes into labor. That's an important point. It means when it's considered, a woman could go into labor and that could take, and even talking about the process of giving birth, not just the labor pains, but the process of giving birth could be a long time until the baby actually comes out. So when do we start counting? What's a day? If by the time the baby comes out, like we say, when was the baby born? After Shkia, before Shkia, after Shkia would be the next day. So then it goes with when baby was born. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, does it, because I don't remember this, but is it when the head comes out or when the whole body comes out?
The body comes out.
So like what? So if the head comes out and you got 1 minute left before Shkia, and then it takes the whole minute for the body to come out, and now it's after Shkia.
If you're talking, I mean, again, no one's sitting with a. I mean, that's you're talking about some guy who's standing there with his stop clock, with his stopwatch, and but Rosh Verubay. So but the baby comes out. It's almost, but if the Shkia comes in and they're talking about the feet still didn't come out yet, but most of the body came out, and someone clocked that moment and checked it versus all the opinions of the Zmanim and says no, it was after Shkia, not before Shkia. Then we'd get into questions if the complete birth. But the birth is a birth. Okay. No, it was from it's a good question because this also when the doctor actually records it on they do check right away the time, so that's usually that same time. In other words, from the end of birth, notwithstanding that less than 72 hours have passed, notwithstanding that less than 72 hours have passed because the baby was born later in the day, and that's so it's only, let's say, even an hour left of that day, so it's really 49 hours that the baby's old. The author bases this ruling on the opinion of the Magen Avram, see Mishnah Berurah 33010. I'm not sure if the Mishnah Berurah agrees or disagrees, but he says to check it out. But either way, if you're in a situation where the woman you're in doubt and there's a question of sakana, then to use the 11 to go with 72 hours versus 49 hours is not an issue. Okay. In other words, it's not considered to have transgressed in any manner. The footnotes are taking into note the from person who's going to say, how much am I not violating the Shabbos? It's not a time for you to be, again, if there's a question and the woman needs it, so we'll classify it as 72 hours versus 3 days. Okay, so we've classified the woman who's dealing with, who's recovering with childbirth. So we have childbirth, we have post-childbirth. In the post-childbirth, we have the first 3 days, which are the most crucial. Where no matter what, even if the woman says no, we don't take the woman into account. We do everything we need for her recovery. The 7-day period is less crucial. So therefore, if both the doctor and the woman says I'm okay, even if you're in the opinion that maybe she needs something, we don't transgress the Shabbos. So that gives us the 3 we have so far: birth, pre-birth, birth, 3 days, and 7 days. Now, what about after the first 7 days? Even though she says, no, I need something, then we don't transgress the Shabbos because she's after 7 days. That's already 7 days after recovery. Then she goes into classification. I think we learned in chapter number 291, where she is then like a person who's ill. Hold on, Aaron, let me just finish the law. Hold on. A person who's ill, who is not in danger. Then, like in that case, if something is needed, then a non-Jew, if he or she's available, can do it. What happens if she's cold in the first 30 days? She says, I'm cold, and you have to turn up the heat. And it's not easy for you to find a non-Jew. It doesn't mean you have to stand on the street for 40 minutes to find someone. Even if you're saying, wait a second, you're not really that cold, it's summer. Thomas means the around July month, right? July, August time. If a woman is cold in the first 30 days of childbirth, no questions asked unless quick mamish you have a cleaner or someone, a non-Jew in the house, and you say quickly turn up the heat, that's obviously better. But if you can have to start looking for non-Jew, no questions, turn up the heat. Even if it's in the summer month and you're saying maybe she's overreacting, that's not a time. We're very careful with the question of being cold. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, so my first child had the cord wrapped around his neck, so we had a C-section emergency, and then everything was good. But my question is do you get extra time than the 7 days because C-sections take longer to recover?
Because that's nothing to it's not about the childbirth. It's about a woman after post-operation or post-operation, like any person post-operation. Then it's a question of the level of if she's considered a sakana, not sakana, if she's critically ill, if she's bedridden. All the things that would be applied to anyone after post-operation would apply to this woman, to the woman. Okay. Let's do footnote number 12. Footnote 12 is midsummer if she says she feels cold. That doesn't say anything about the heat, about the air conditioning. We're talking about that atzainenes sima, which is if she's cold. If a woman says she's cold after childbirth, that's considered crucial. Barbara, maybe you want to give a little insight. What's the reason for that?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Why is a woman in the first 30 days after childbirth vulnerable to cold? Why is that something that we'd be very concerned about? It seems like in the halacha, we're saying that if she's, after 7 days, she's pretty much she shifts over to someone who's not critically ill. But if her issue is that she's cold, then that's something we're very sensitive to, because after childbirth, it's dangerous for a woman if she says she's cold. Are you familiar with anything medically about that?
I have limited experience. I worked on the post, and usually I apologize.
Danny says it's low iron. That would make sense.
No, I'm just
Fairness
kidding.
about.
Yeah, but Barbara, you broke up. We didn't hear what you said.
I said it could be low iron. It could be maybe she's, sorry, me.
Well, she fixes her
Sorry.
mic. You keep breaking up. I'll just say my piece. I was told for the whole process of being pregnant, everything's heightened. So her smell, her tastes, her things will happen that never happened before. So just watch out. She could be cold, then she could be hot, then she could be cold again for no reason.
Yeah, but okay, Danny says a good point. She says that, like, and Bob also point out that could be a low iron, and that would be something we have to watch. Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, let's just finish up this last law here, and then we're going to go a little bit into next law. Maybe a little of the preview of it, because it's the complicated laws of Erev Chatzeres, of the Erev, of the courtyard Erev. Okay, Havlat Shenoiled. But first, let's finish the laws here. What about the child? So we've talked about the mother. What about the child, him or herself? So the child that's been born, to care for the child, even though that caring for the child would be possibly things that would include violating the Shabbos, not a problem. We wash the child like a child has to be washed after birth. We cut the umbilical cord. Varav, and the limbs are straightened. Anything that the child needs in after birth, it's not any questions asked. Shabbos, not Shabbos, obviously. Achim ein ben kayama. Okay, this is something that's not really applicable today. If the child is not going to survive, what is an example of a child not survive? In Mishnah times or Shulchan Aruch times, there was this idea. The halacha was basically that a child born in the 8th month, not the 7th or the 9th, but in the 8th month, is considered ein ben kayama, unless the child lives out. Childborn, we know that the childbirth in the 8th month is very dangerous, and if the child is born in the 8th month, then a lot of the laws of that we apply to a childbirth doesn't apply to the child who is born in the 8th month. Not talking about the mother, talking about the child. Asur tatli, you can't even carry him. But the mother may bend over him and nurse him. She needs to nurse, but that's not enough. But otherwise, he's muksa. Why? Because they don't consider that he's going to live. Again, so you see quickly in footnote number 13, he says, today an infant born in the 8th month is considered the same as other infants, so says the Chazon Ish, there's Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the two main poskim of post-war time, says this is not applicable today. But there's a concept of a ben shmeina, but we have to check, obviously, the reasoning of, because this is brought down in the Talmud, in the Mishnah. It's not just an idea that a child born in the 8th month is considered in ben kayama, which is cannot survive. But obviously, there's different things in that with the way they were, and there's many reasons why I guess the halacha would not look at it today because of different things that maybe have changed, that I'm not 100% familiar with myself. But one who could look up in the Chazon Ish's Psak or Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which are the authorities that we all accept in nowadays. Okay. So that basically finishes off this little chapter that deals with childbirth. Any questions before we try to go into see a little bit in the next one?
I was just going to say, the other thing you have to be very careful after a woman gives birth is that she doesn't get an infection. And if they get an infection, they could get cold.
Sure. 100 again. Anything that there's absolutely zero space for risk at all in the situation where a person has to be starting to get all from and all religious and saying this is not the time. Okay. Now I was considering the next two chapters deal with kind of the laws of Erev. Here we're talking about Erev Chatzeres, Erev the courtyards. Now, again, you have we're not gonna get start to halacha. We're just gonna get some ideas here. I'm just gonna bring up. I'm sure, is there a way to share a second share? Hold on a second. Let me see if there's a way for me to share another page. Let's try something here a second. Let's share this page. Okay, this is compliments of ChatGPT, so it's not 100% accurate, but this is basically a oops. This is basically a picture of. I asked it to make a picture of the various types of Erev Chatzeros. So, what is an Erev Chatzer? So, this picture on top is a Chatzer. Till today, there's courtyards, right? So you have, let's say, there's courtyards right down, literally where I doubt if I were to go to Shul right now, I would go to a chutzner, which is the Batei Ran. The Batei Ran is a chutzner. It's surrounded by a wall, or the outer perimeter of the houses create a wall, and inside is the courtyard. In the courtyard, the kids play, people hang their laundry. There's a mikvah, but that's a chutzner. That's a typical chutzner. Now, in where I live here, so there'll be literally outside my house here. There's Batei Ran, and then there's another chutzner and another chutzner and another chutzner. So there's a variety of chutzeros. There's different courtyards. So the law is basically that this alt is taken, the text is taken from the introduction, so we could read it from here. Introduction remarks to chapter 94. Houses usually were arranged in this fashion with endless variations. There's different types of, but let's say over here, you have 4 or 5 houses that all are surrounded and everyone shares and has communal use of the chatzar, right? He has over here like a little, this is literally, they have it outside also. They closed up the water wells, but the wells are still there today. There's the wells over there where they would draw the water from. And everyone has, that point is that everyone who lives in the chatzar, in the courtyard, has communal access. So it's not like one person has more access than the next person. Again, in the Shulchan Aruch we write about it, how much there's first of all the laws of partnership. That when there's a courtyard, what's the universal acceptance of how much space each person has outside their house in the courtyard, and what's communal. So there's different laws. Like for the first 4 amas, really belongs to the person themselves. Like your neighbor can't come in and put their laundry right outside your door because that's kind of in your space, even though it's a courtyard, right? So, but with regard to Shabbos, we want to know how could this whole group of people carry in the courtyard, because we have the issue of carrying. So houses usually arranged in this fashion with endless variations throughout these halachas. When reference is made to people living in a courtyard, it means people living in the houses that open to the courtyard. That's one of the ideas. It means that you see over here the doors, they're all opening into the courtyard. If you wanted to get to your house, and there's different halachas. What about if your house in the back has a separate entrance in and out of your house, that you don't have to go through the courtyard to get to your house? How would that affect your communal status as far as your obligations, or how you participate in the chutzner? Are you a member of the chutzner, not a member of the chutzner? If you don't join the Erev, do you disrupt the Erev? So there's all these questions, but just let's say typically this is your entry point. So, and again, this is today it looks like this, and there's literally down the street from me chutzers that look exactly like this. But an apartment building is basically the same idea. Hold on, Aaron. So up into the courtyard, in order to carry from the houses into the courtyard, all residents had to join in making an eruv. This is a rabbinical ordinance instituted by King Solomon and his court. So when was it start? This was an idea that was brought up by King Solomon. Yes, Aaron.
Yeah, just 2 quick things. Number one, my wife lived like this in Syria, exactly as one of these pictures, but they had a fountain, which the kids could have swam in. I guess as if it's not Shabbat, but Sephardic people might be able to swim on Shabbos. But in my apartment, so you can walk down the stairs, go into the basement, and go out the back. There's the building. There's a clear spot where you walk, and then there's a fence, and then there's fences and walls, and then there's a pool in the middle. So a lot of Jews who don't swim on Shabbos will just sit down at the pool and read or talk to their friends. So they my rabbi said we could carry, it's not a problem, and it's in the roof anyways.
So let me explain this. It's not so simple. Why did Solomon do this? So Solomon did this. So the idea is like this. What's the number one issue? Let's say there is no Eruv. So outside this door here, you're going to go into a public domain. Now we're going to see in the bottom picture here, there's what's called, there's courtyards that go into valleys, the alleys. And the alley goes out here, over here, with this arrow to the public domain. So here we would have, let's say, a few courtyards that go to an alley. An alley is not a public domain, right? And it's a carmelist, and you can make an alley also into a private domain if all the groups of the different courtyards together come together and make it an Eruv to unify the whole chevra, and then this becomes one big entity, and then you go out from here, like the entrance, into the public domain. So let's say there is no Eruv in this public domain. So why do we have to have an Eruv? This is a private space. This is like private property. You go till today. You have gated communities. That's what a courtyard is, a gated community, not far from my mother's house. So here it looks like this. But if 2 blocks from my mother's house, there's a golf course gated community. Now you could come in as a guest and visit, but it's gated, cut it off, and there's a guard, and there's doors that they close at night, and it's literally surrounded by a gate. So why do you need an Eruv? I mean, why do you need anything? It's a private domain. It's private space. So King Solomon was concerned that the rabbis in King Solomon's time said, one second, if this whole place is going to be without any kind of mention of Shabbos, because it's not really public domain, a private domain, because each person has their own house. So we want to make sure people shouldn't forget the laws of carrying on Shabbos, because that the thinking was really people stay in their courtyard throughout Shabbos. They're not really going out of the courtyard. That's their hangout for the whole Shabbos. And a lot of times, like the courtyard next to me has the shul there. You don't have to ever leave the courtyard on Shabbos. So Solomon wanted people to remember the laws of Shabbos. So he said, in order for this private domain, because it's a gated area, to be considered, you could carry on Shabbos, you have to make an Eruv. An Eruv is made up of food, which basically makes, Eruv, like the word Eruv, to makes that you're not just private homes that have access to a courtyard, but you're kind of one group. For instance, if there would be one kitchen, that itself would be the Eruv, because everyone eats together. Like the famous story the Rebbe told many times, that in the days of when the Rebbe's father was getting smicha, he was trying to get his rabbinic audience, and he was sitting by the Brisker Rav, Reb Chaim Brisker, who gave him smicha. The way Rav Chaim Brisker would give smicha, he would have the young gentleman, or the gentleman, sit by him, and when questions would come to the Rav throughout the day, he would ask him to give the ruling. And if he felt that the student was knowledgeable in all the questions that came by, so he trusted that he would be knowledgeable, and he would give him the smicha. The Rebbe's father was sitting next to Reb Chaim Brisker, and they came running in that they forgot to do an Erev Chatzeros. This, let's say, a Chatzer, a courtyard like this, forgot to make a Erev, and it was Shabbos Cholamayt Sukkos. And part of the community setting was, like a lot of places have, there was one sukkah for everyone to sit in. Now the problem was, if there was concern that because they forgot to make an Erev Chatzeros, no one could carry the food out to the sukkah. How are you going to eat? So they came with a panic to Reb Chaim Brisker. I guess it was Shabbos, because before Shabbos you could do it. And he was sitting there in Shabbos Chol Hamoed. That's also an interesting scenario, that he was sitting Shabbos Chol Hamoed by the Brisker Rav trying to get smicha. So the Brisker Rav turned to the Rebbe's father and said, "No, what do you say? What would you do in such a question?" He says, "You don't need to make an Erev. The sukkah itself is the Erev. The very fact that they have a designated place where they're all going to eat, that unites, mixes together the whole community. That's itself." And Chaim Brisker was very happy with his ruling. Okay, so this is this classic case of an Erev. Now, what about in Aaron's question? Aaron's question is whether he lives in Brooklyn. And for good or for bad, whether you accept it or not, that Moshe Feinstein had his opinions about making an Erev in Brooklyn, there's an Erev in the city, in the area that you're in the apartment is. So you have to make an Erev Chatzeros, because, for instance, I live in an apartment building. I have 6 people that live in my apartment building. Let's say 5 of them live there. Not all of them are Shomer Shabbos, because if you have non-Shomer Shabbos people, that part of your Erev, it's a problem. If they're not keeping Shabbos, how you unify with them in Shabbos? These are all questions. We're not going to get into all the details because it's Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The laws of Erev are very complex. Now, we don't find that people make in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, Erev Chatzeros in every apartment building. Why? Because there's a one Erev around the whole city, that's like one big Chatzer. And there is the Rabbanut of Yerushalayim, one of you does make an Erev Chatzeros for the whole community. But if you don't hold by the Erev, or there is no Erev, and you have more than another, you have one more Jewish person living in your building, if you want to carry in your apartment building, you have to make an Erev Chatzeros. We're going to see there's a question tomorrow. Next week we'll learn. Someone asked in Crown Heights that they don't keep the Erev over there, and they have so they have a group of Chevra and they do an Erev Chatzeros in their apartment building. Yes, Rebecca, you're on mute.
So, that's exactly what my question was. So, there was an Orthodox rabbi who used to live in my building, and I asked him about the question of an Erev Chatzeros, and he
Yeah.
said that it's not necessary because it's understood when you rent an apartment from the management that you're not only renting your actual apartment, but you're also paying for like the common area. And actually, the tenants where I live get charged for like electricity usage and water usage and things like that in the communal spaces. So he felt that we don't need an Erev Chatzeros in my building.
Okay, so that would be what's called Vadabayit. That's an interesting idea. That the Vadabayit itself is the Erev Chatzeros, but the truth of the problem is that I'm not sure if money is something that could do it. It has to be food related.
But no, I think he was saying that it's understood that we're paying to rent the common area as well.
I understand that, but again, laws of Erev Chatzeros. I'm not going to try to pretend I'm an expert. We're going to learn this together. But I'm saying is that it has to be. It's more than monetary, because let's say in this apartment, let's say this picture on top, right? We're not talking about renting. We're talking about buying. Let's say everyone owns their house here. But when you buy a house, if you were to sell your house, right? There's 5 houses in this courtyard. If you were to sell one of your house to someone else, you're selling not just the house, you're selling the access to the courtyard, right? That's part of being an owner of the courtyard.
Uh-huh.
Access to the courtyard. So it's just like paying a Vadabayit, or I'm not sure why paying the bills would be any different than having. And also, what do you think happens in any kind of apartment? Everyone has to, whether you have to pay bills or you have chores, or who takes them. Someone has to pick up the garbage, right? So if you're going to pay a cleaner to pick up the garbage, and it comes out of a fund of the chevra, of the group of the houses, that still doesn't say that King Solomon doesn't say you have. King Solomon says you have to have food. A place that kind of unites everyone, making it like one table kind of thing. So I'm not sure what his basis is of paying would make it an Erev Chatzeros. But what Mr. Aubry you can do is, again, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying I'm not familiar. What you can say is that I'm sure that whoever the rabbis are in Manhattan, someone is making in Manhattan has an Erev, someone is making in Manhattan an Erev Chatzeros for the whole Chatzer.
Community.
How does that work technically in a place like America that's not in Israel, where there's kind of an understanding it's a Jewish state? So there could be some sort of, like, just because the rabbis have an Erev in Manhattan, and there's, I don't know, thousands of apartment buildings there, to assume that one of the ideas of an Erev Chatzeros is that if we could assume that because it benefits someone, you could make an Erev on behalf of someone. Meaning to say, you don't have to ask them, do you want to join the Erev? You can make it on behalf of someone because it benefits them. So but I'm assuming someone in Manhattan is making Erev Chatzeros. You can't just have a community space without an Erev Chatzeros. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, so I studied this for my rabbi on Tuesday. We sat for 2 Tuesdays studying the ins and outs of this Eruv and Brooklyn. So give you 2 examples that you can discuss it. So the first one is one of my friends, he's a rabbi. So they have a house, and as you know, you have a driveway and you share it. So everyone in the house has their own sukkah on sukkahs. And so my friend, he bakes some challahs and gives it to the owner who he rents from. And that then allows him to take out all the food to the sukkah and make Shabbos. Okay, now in the other situation we also talked about was you have a line of brownstones, which is one house after another, and they're attached. Okay, so at one, and if you're all Jewish, if not, you kind of have to ask permission to do this. But at one end you put a stake, and at the other end you put a stake. This way you can take food from one apartment, and if you want to eat at your friend's house, which could be your neighbor, now you're allowed to walk it from your house to your neighbor or to two houses down. So you put in this row, one stake at each end.
Yeah, okay, but that only gives you the walled space. But here, even if you have, like in this picture, right, there's no question about a wall. The wall surrounds perfectly the whole courtyard. But that's still not enough. Even though it's walled around, you still have to do a food Erev that unites the courtyard. That's what Shlomo Erev Chatzeris is via the food, the meal that everyone participates in, makes this courtyard, although everyone has access to the courtyard because everyone has private space. Now, in the laws of Erev, there's also a lot of questions. There's sometimes if you don't have a proper Erev, then you like we're going to learn. You could carry in the courtyard, but you can't carry from your house into the courtyard. But if you want to be able to have access, and so this is a courtyard. Like I said, down the street we have something just like this. But if you close this whole space up and it becomes an apartment building, that's the same thing. Or
Okay.
hotel.
So
I'm
what
saying-
I want to say is, okay,
Well,
the
you're
one
just-
you're pointing to, exactly like my wife's, but instead of the tree, it's a fountain with water that on the weekdays they would swim in, the kids. So now I'm going to ask my father-in-law or my wife what they did
I'm sure
on
that
Shabbos.
should have nothing. We're gonna continue this picture next week because to understand this properly, we have to go through this step by step, and then we can understand the laws. Otherwise, it's just gonna be confusing. But so the next picture is we'll go through the text next week. The next picture is two chutzers, two courtyards that have a single exit out. Okay, this is it's a little extreme. Like the picture that ChatGPT didn't do great. But even if the question is how much opening there is between the two courtyards that separate them, really, that would make a single exit out to the street. Here you have two courtyards that have no connection to each other and have their own entrance to the street. And in the fourth case scenario is the idea of a mavui. A mavui is the alley. So you have an alley that's open to the public. Usually the alley is you're not going to get arrested if you show up in an alley. It's like it's an alley. It's not it doesn't belong to the courtyards, but there's kind of a universal space, and there's a way to make an Erev in an alley like he has over here. And in the alley you have different courtyards going into the alley, and from the alley you go out to the public domain.
Couldn't you? Okay, so in any of the ones, not the top one, but any of the others, couldn't you from one corner each where the exit is on each of them put a string?
No, okay. So the question is, how do you unite? Let's say this case over here, the alley. How do you unite this whole picture that the two? That's what we have here. Here has two courtyards. So we have two courtyards that go into a single alley that goes to the street. So can we make this whole picture into one single domain if the two courtyards, like in this picture over here, they get together and they say we want to have make the whole area one single private domain, so we can carry from courtyard to courtyard in the alley. So then the question is, do you need to have two different areas, an area for the alley and an area for each individual courtyard? That we'll discuss in details as is Hashem next week. You just wanted to start. We'll have to go back to this picture for the introduction to have all the laws clear and start learning the laws. All right, we'll do the best we can in this one. This is a tough subject. Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you for joining. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.